Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast. My name is Nick Day, CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, and we are specialist HR recruiters. Now, today, I'm really excited to welcome Lesley Cooper to the show. For those not familiar, she is a management consultant with over 25 years experience in the design and the delivery of all elements of employee wellbeing management programs. Now, we talk about wellbeing all the time in the world of HR. Lesley is an absolute professional in this space. In fact, since 1997, she founded her business, WorkingWell, which is an award-winning specialist consulting firm that helps companies to manage workplace pressures in a way that really facilitates growth and development. It was shortlisted for Best Wellbeing Service Provider at the Great British Workplace Wellbeing Awards in 2021. And Lesley has also co-authored not one, but two brilliant books all about improving employee wellbeing. The first is called Dangerous Waters, Strategies for Improving Wellbeing at Work. And the second is Managing Workplace Stress, a Best Practice Blueprint. Now, we all know global competitive pressures are resulting in employees and leaders being put under more pressure than we have ever really seen before. It's resulting in loads of different conflicting demands. It's so much to manage at the moment. We've got burnout, we've got perks, we've got flexibility at work, we've got safety and so much more to really unpick. So I welcome Lesley to the show today to really get into the detail here. What do we need to do to help our employees really perform at their optimum at work? What are the things we're not considering? What are sometimes the invisible pressures? Success is so visible in today's world of work, but actually behind that success, many things are failing, and we need to understand what those things are if we want our employees to really perform optimally. So I have an expert here. I'm going to welcome her to the show. Welcome, Lesley Cooper, to the HR L&D Podcast. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great, Nick. Thank you very much for the invitation. Wow, what an introduction. Goodness, no pressure here.
No pressure. And I want to make you feel absolutely safe in this environment. That's what it's all about, right? We're going to get into psychological safety in some detail later on. Before we do, question I ask all my guests, which is this: what do the words human resources mean to you?
We have a great phrase, or we think it's great, we use it a lot, that when we employ someone, the whole person comes to work, not just the bit that does the job. So that's your human resources. Those are the people that you should be talking to, not the task.
No, well, I'm glad you put that right front and center of the conversation. It's going to be the conversation piece for today, right? Really focusing on the people that matter. And I mentioned very briefly in the introduction, my personal belief here, success is really visible, right? We see the performances of businesses, we see the bottom line numbers get published, but it's the impact behind that success that's often invisible. So I'd like to know from your perspective and your experience, what impact are you seeing this huge amount of pressure we're seeing put on people at the minute having on well-being that perhaps we're not always seeing behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, we live in a world now, don't we, where there are just too many claims on our attention. So, and by the way, we recruit for highly engaged people. So what happens when you put highly engaged people in that environment is that they engage endlessly. Yeah. And I think what we're seeing is a conflict, really. It's always been there, but I think people have been able to navigate it better between people's individual purpose, if you like, what makes them, whatever it is on their radar that gets them out of bed in the morning, other than their job, which is obviously very important. How you square the whole person with the bit that does the job, because the bit that does the job is pulled into an environment where they are actively encouraged, and also they want to contribute to the max to their company mission, and those two things are coming in conflict, obviously. And what happens is, to try and resolve that conflict, people just work longer hours, which is the equivalent of, which is great, that's okay, you can do that now and again. In fact, when we feel energized like that, we want to do that, but it becomes a sustainability problem, and that, I think, is what's playing out now. We've got workforces that have just the right number of people in them, perhaps a little fewer than they really need, and the natural tendency of engaged staff to make it work means that they are generally giving up the things that actually make them and make them sustainable. And of course, squeeze a balloon, it'll come out somewhere. The mental health statistics tell us that people are burning out much more regularly than they did. So to me, it's about divided loyalties, I think.
I think that's really interesting. So you raised a couple of points there. I'm going to try and reflect and see if I can bring it all out so we can open up the conversation. Somewhere I wasn't necessarily going to take it, right? But I think you've raised some interesting points. So I've done, and I'm guilty of this, a number of webinars all about, or podcasts about wellbeing perks, about things that we're doing that keep people engaged. People want to create businesses where people want to be at work. Behind the scenes, we've also got a newfound fear post-COVID of people trying to prove they can be trusted working from home. People trying to, fearful of not losing their jobs, and we're going into a bit of a recession now, of saying, I'm working really hard. I'm an absolute performer. You can trust me with this. And the employer's going, we do trust you. Have these extra perks. Have more. Work flexible hours. It's all fine. It's all fine. So everyone's saying it's fine on the outside, and we're working harder, and we're giving our employees more. It's all good, good, good. But actually, you've mentioned there a really interesting point. It might make people happier that they're working for more perks, but they're working longer hours. They're working really, really hard. And no matter how much you spend on a Ferrari or a car, a Lamborghini, doesn't matter. Eventually, if it keeps driving, something's going to break and it's going to need fixing. So how do we manage that? What's the impact you're seeing then behind the scenes, that invisible piece, that what we mentioned, safety? What can businesses do to make sure they're engaging their staff on one hand and they're doing the right things by delivering what they're asking for, but not overworking them at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer to it is prioritizing and understanding the role that recovery plays in sustainability. It's such a simple thing to say, and everyone, they all nod, but then the behavior doesn't match it. It's recovery is seen as rest. It's something you do when you're able, when you're caught up, and trying to get organizations to understand, and we spend a lot of time doing this these days, that recovery is an intentional investment in the next performance wave. It's not something you do when you're exhausted. If you want to sustain your personal performance, and of course that means organizationally sustain your organizational performance, you need to recognize that humans are not built like computers. They're not designed to be always on. It's sprint, recover, sprint, recover. In our ancestry, we would have huge periods of physical activity while you were chasing lunch, and then you'd wrestle it to the ground, and then you'd eat it, and then you'd lie down in your cave for a while. What happens now is you take another phone call, you make another call, you get on another Zoom. So that kind of low level adrenalization, which is great on one level for a while because it makes you feel 100% alive. And, some of us have a little bit of urgency addiction, so we like that. It makes us feel vital. But over time, physiologically, we haven't changed very much. We're not designed to function like that. So cognitively, you obviously lose your edge. Emotionally, you become living in that constant threat state, because that's what your brain thinks is happening. Whoa, what's happening here? Got to keep going, got to go. Something's chasing me. In the end, you live in a permanent state of threat, which is not great then for creativity and all those sorts of things, because your primary brain, the survival brain, is the one that will always, thank God, that's why we're here, will always take over from the kind of prefrontal cortex stuff, which is where all the clever analysis stuff happens. And so our creative brain will always be subdued by threat. So that's not doesn't happen straight away, but you live in that environment for a longish period of time, then you get into that kind of permanent state of arousal, which then makes other things more difficult. I think it's a mindset thing to start with. It's understanding. And once people change their minds about it, I get it. So what we say is 10 in 90. For every 90 minutes, you should be spending 10 minutes doing something different. This is not lying on the ground with a wet towel on your head. This is going to do something different. If you've been involved in a very cerebral task, go and do something that's more diffuse focus. If you've been sat on your chair, as we all are, get up, go downstairs, walk around, get the blood moving in your body, come back, carry on with that task, or do a new task, come back to that task in another 90 minutes. Chunking your time up is actually much more consistent with the way our brains like to work.
It's interesting. Just listening to this as a podcast host, right? When you started describing how hard we work, I felt exhausted. And just talking about taking a 10-minute break genuinely relaxed that feeling in my mind. And that was actually working for me. I'm hoping it's doing the same impact for those listening, right? We very rarely do it. I've got a couple of things that come to mind here. The first is, how much are we guilty as businesses of continuing what is a self-perpetuating cycle? Because there's a bit of you talk about mindset here. if my compatriot, though, is always, there's a little bit of us that sometimes we want to take a break, but we're scared to, because we know that we feel like everyone else is working 100 miles an hour. So if we don't, I'll get found out or I'll get caught behind. And everyone else is actually thinking the same thing. But the reality is everyone in that group probably needs a bit of a rest or those recovery periods. So that's kind of the first point I'd love to explore in just a moment. I'm going to angle that with a different podcast bad thing here. I'm going to ask two questions in one. The second bit is, I deliver executive coaching to senior leaders, and I have a coach myself. And the one thing he helped me with is something that I couldn't see for myself, which is all about recovery. And I'm going to say what he said, because I think hopefully this will resonate. It did for me. And there's a podcast by Jake Humphreys called the High Performance Podcast. And they talk about this a lot. A Grand Prix is won and lost in the pit stop. It's the one time that a Grand Prix car, with all of its amazing performance credentials, takes a break. It's very short. We're talking minutes, seconds, but without those pit stops, the cars don't finish the race. The tires go, it breaks down. And my coach said this to me, and it suddenly went, whoa, you know what? That's it. I have never taken a break in what I do. It's one thing to the next, And if that's me, that's the truth for everybody else, which links to that self-perpetuating cycle. What can we do, and what are WorkingWell doing as a business, because this is the actual expert here, to help break the cycle of en masse overworking?
Well, your two questions actually are related, and it's back to the mindset thing, that if people, because we're a very social species, we do take our clues from other people. So, and we'll end up talking about the leadership role in that, obviously, because people watch their leaders all the time. They're not aware they are, but they are taking their cues, and we take our cues from each other. So it takes a brave person to step out of line in that sense, because we also have this urgent need to belong. So we need to conform and to do what everybody else is doing. So there is a bravery piece, and the bravery piece comes from obviously having the strength of character to know and to be aware enough to know that actually I'm not as good as I was an hour and a half ago, but sometimes we're too busy to even notice. Your body will send you signals the whole time, actually, but we ignore them. And it's great, in meetings when we used to watch each other or actually physically be present, you could see people's, major muscles, their legs would be moving under the table because it's their body saying, can we stand up now? I'm done sitting here. So, those sorts of things, those cues we've lost, and we're not so good at even listening to our own bodies really these days, because we're so focused on what we're doing. So the answer comes back to what we were saying about changing the narrative, because if you understand that recovery isn't rest, it's not passive, it's renewal, it is an active, intentional behavior that is going to make the next performance wave better, then it becomes easier to get a narrative going in a team, particularly if the manager buys into it and understands it themselves and can actually then actively encourage, mainly by doing it themselves, but also by recognizing that, scheduling meetings such that nobody schedules a back-to-back meeting. Don't do that. When people are on calls at sort of 9:59, they go, got another one at 10. It's like, why did you agree to that? I will join that meeting at 10:15 or 10:10. I need to walk around. Otherwise, there's no point me being on your call because I'm useless to you. I'm not functioning as I should. So it is partly about recognizing that we all do take our cues from each other. And if we want things to be different, we have to be brave enough to be the change. You might be the person that has to say, I don't think we should schedule this call at 10. Can we schedule it 10:10? There's no reason why not. It's just habit. But it starts understanding why you're doing it.
And the person at the other end is probably thankful for it, because they're probably going from 9 to 10 as well. And they go, oh, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and we our own internal meetings, we try and finish them. If not, because it's easier to change yourself, obviously, than other people. So we'll try and finish our own meetings at 10 to the hour. So if you have got another one, we at least are not responsible for shooting our own feet in the feet.
Nice. I like that.
So we can arrive on calls in good shape.
I hope that's resonating. I'm hoping there's thousands of light bulbs going off here, because the reality is most of the people that listen to this show, if you're tuning in right now, they're going to be at an HR leadership level, HR director, HR manager, head of HR. And they are people that can start that sea change. They are people in a position that can change that role and say, right, everybody, this is how we do our meetings. Everyone, I want you to take a break every 90 minutes. So let's hope that happens. I know from what I'm hearing and what's landing for me is it makes sense. And I know how I feel when I go from meeting to meetings. And I've never even considered breaking it up by just 10 minutes. But I'm imagining most people I would suggest that to would actually be thankful of the same 10 minutes back.
Yeah.
So it's a simple change. Let's link it back to performance, though. It's very easy, I guess, to say let's add the recoveries. We want to know what that impact has on the business. So how and why does employee well-being influence employee performance?
Right. Okay. So as we said at the beginning, when you employ someone, the whole person comes, not just the bit that does the job, but the bit that does the job is also massively influenced by the quality of relationships that are going on. Obviously how much control or influence they feel they have, how supported they feel, but mainly how safe they feel in the workplace. Because, again, back to this threat response, we all want to contribute, and we want to contribute at the best standard we can. We want to be the best versions of ourselves we can be, but our physiology will see to it that we have this radar, unfortunately, for things that are threatening, and that's we can't turn that off, and in fact we shouldn't, because that's obviously why we're here. So psychological safety, as it's become known, not a new concept, it's been around for a long time, but I think it's really people starting, thankfully, to understand that if people don't feel safe in the workplace, if they have a sort of low grade fear of negative consequences, and we see this in some of our people actually, support people on a one-to-one basis in therapeutic situations. And what you hear all the time is sentences never get finished. I have to do it because if I don't, I know I really should go and watch my son play football. I really want to see him play football, but I must get this report out, because if I don't, it never gets finished. But we all know the consequences will be bad. So let's not even bother finishing the sentence. Let's just do the work instead. And that's how that's how we end up snipping our own little roots off, if you like, in terms of our root network under the ground that keeps us stable. So, if we feel there are negative consequences for doing what I really want to do, or being even the person that I really am, we wear a mask, we end up not being fully authentically ourselves. And that's not great, obviously, because that's not great for well-being. But from a performance point of view, what you want, particularly in a global competitive market, is everybody being as open and creative as they can be. And nobody's going to take risks. What the wonderful Amy Edmondson, who's done most on this work at Harvard, talks about as interpersonal risks. That every day, every time we interact with anyone, there's a risk to us personally that we're going to be misunderstood, that you're going to say something that someone's going to use against you, that you're going to look foolish, that you're going to make a mistake, all sorts of things. I mean, we could talk for an hour about just those things. So many things. So what we do is we assess them, and depending on how safe you feel your culture is, you assess those risks differently. So we work for some really safe and some really unsafe organizations, and the difference between their people's ability to experiment, take a risk, and it massively affects collaboration. Obviously, if you're working in a team of 3 people, you feel totally safe with each other, that you can say, or with your leaders, say, do you know what, I think that's a really bad idea. I think, if I could be honest, that is a really bad idea. I don't think we should do that. And deliver, news that you don't think your boss or your colleague is potentially going to like. You fail so much faster, and everyone can say, you benefit from, wisdom comes from multiple perspectives, obviously. So other people get to benefit from your ideas. If you don't feel safe to share them, that learning is lost to everybody. So when you make a mistake in an unsafe environment, you hide it, or you become defensive about it. Then nobody else gets to learn from that mistake. So 3 more people make the same one. It's once you get it, you can see the impact on performance. But getting people to the point where they feel comfortable enough to, again, Amy says, candor is expected, not tolerated. It's expected. We expect you to tell the truth. There will be no consequences if you tell the truth. Getting people to really believe that takes a while, but it is very doable. And there are many companies who could, just making a start would be good, because, people are sitting on their hands. And if you think you want more performance to a higher standard with a greater level of well-being, psychological safety is obviously the place to go, because you get it all. You get people's well-being is better because they're not living in a constant state of fear, and you can share and work on your insights collaboratively. There's no downside. I've yet to find a downside, except that it's a little bit difficult, and you have to be a little bit brave as a leader, because you have to start doing it yourself first.
Yeah. Well, there's a fear often associated with openness, all right? But that all links back to psychological safety anyway, as you say. It was interesting at the start of this show, I mentioned to you that there's this perpetual cycle where there's a fear of lack of trust if we don't do, but that all links to the psychological safety as well. If people feel they're trusted, they won't go and they won't necessarily have to do that. They won't neglect their children to do the presentation, because they know they'll understand, right?
It's okay.
It'll link me back to a podcast I did some time ago with Stephen Covey. I won't go into what the podcast content, but his book is called Trust and Inspire.
Okay.
I think when you build that trust, people do feel inspired, and it's very hard to get to that level of trust if you haven't got a framework, a psychological safety framework around it that says, I am trusted. I am going to the football with my kids this weekend. I'm not going to work. I'm happy to say that because I'm not working right now. Right? I'll be on a Monday, and I know it's more complex than that. But actually, that trust piece is so elemental. When people do feel trusted, that's when they can do their best work. That's when they can really, really perform, as we know. I guess this leads me to the question of, is then managing well-being, managing psychological safety, which is absolutely involved in this element, is that the job of the HR professional that's listening to this show?
Well, everyone is a stakeholder. I think this is one of those phrases that we use a lot, don't we? But HR definitely have a very important role. But no, it is not 100% their responsibility. And it's hard to say. It's almost like a virtuous circle. Everybody, affinity diagram, probably everyone has an impact on everybody else, and therefore everyone has an obligation to contribute to psychological safety. So HR can certainly help managers understand the importance of it and prioritize it as something to be invested in. I mean, on a personal level, when we start working with companies, it is often the HR people who understand it, because they've got the helicopter vision, if you like, to see. Sometimes you're too busy doing, aren't you, to actually work out why these things are important. Our HR professionals will have a natural insight and enthusiasm for these types of concepts. So they're great people to actually kick the process off. But in the end, like so many things, what makes the difference is what happens on the ground on a day-to-day basis. So, you can create the mandate, managing upwards to get the money, perhaps, if, this is something that's important for us, it's a priority for us, and we should understand it and make sure that we feed it into our leadership development so that people understand, is that a lot of, traditional, what you might refer to as traditional leadership development ideas, of course, all play directly to psychological safety. That's why you have a coaching mindset. That's why you have to be careful how you give feedback, because this is what you're trying to do, not make the person feel that they don't belong and alienated and really rather rubbish. So, it's not new. But I do think that there's HR can have a real benefit in driving the agenda, both up and down. But in the end, the stuff that makes the difference is what we do with each other. What we ask people to do and the way in which we ask them to do it, and how we support them. So that means the individual has responsibility, obviously, to trust so that they can be trusted. Somebody's got to break the deadlock. Leaders obviously have a massive obligation in terms of modeling that behavior themselves, and also, showing vulnerability has become a bit of a thing. Everyone says that now, but it plays directly into people feeling safe, because we all grow up in a hierarchy, teachers and students, bosses, employees, we do live in a hierarchical society. So we're all a bit like, well, he must know what he's talking about because he or she is the boss, So it's quite hard to break that. So what you kind of need is people who are in positions of, authority or superior hierarchy to actually admit that they screwed up now and again. And this is how it made me feel. But I'm sharing it with you so we can all learn it, because it gives people permission then to do the same. So employees have got their own responsibilities to be the change. Leaders have got to be brave enough to, to admit to themselves sometimes they don't have all the answers, and to admit to their people that they don't have all the answers. And then of course there's senior leadership who have to really take on board that some of these the narrative needs to be modeled all the way. So you can't say, well, middle managers screw up, but we don't. Everybody has to sing from the same sheet. But and there's some, I'm sure Pixar animation studios are often held up as, Ed Catmull as being one of the best examples of how you can lead this from the top, but feed it from the bottom. And he created wonderful opportunities. He says of his own films, when we first make a film, it's terrible. But what we do is the storyboards go in and in and in through multiple layers of employee feedback from all over the organization to say, I love that, I thought that stinks, and eventually, because candor is expected, no one fears it or takes it personally, you end up with whatever it was, 10 box office hits one after the other, which is unheard of. So it's everyone is a stakeholder, but HR can be, we love HR because often they're the first people to get it and say there's something in this that we should be doing more with.
I think something that lands for me when you talk about the role of HR, you said something in your answer that said often they're managing so many things, they don't always live the behaviours they're trying to pass out. I think that's a problem. We spoke off air briefly that sometimes the things we teach, the things we most need to listen to ourselves as well, right? We become experts, we don't listen to our own advice. And there are multiple priorities that HR professionals are managing, whether it's, the trends from diversity campaigns to flexibility at work, now to psychological safety and well-being and employees and organizational frameworks and blah, 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 it goes on and on, that sometimes they can feel overwhelmed. Yeah. And actually, the argument is then if you're feeling overwhelmed, the one thing you probably need is a little bit of space and rest and recovery, but it's so hard. But the answer is in everything you've given today, which is having that openness, that candor, to be able to pass that up the chain as well and say to your board of directors, I need some space. I need to do it. And so, as you say, it feeds both bottom up and top down. Hopefully you meet in the middle and everyone has that framework of trust, that framework of safety to perform optimally. I think there'll be some... So a lot of people are thankful that you've said it's not all on HR shoulders here, and it isn't. So what I'd like then to ask is, if it's not on their shoulders, what's the role of the employee then? Employee themselves in managing their own well-being, and because they'll throw it back, they'll say, but the company should be doing that for me. Yeah,
it's a great question. It is the fact is that we're all habit driven. And you said it yourself just there, is that, when the pressure's on, when time is tight, we are more inclined to do what we always do because it's effortless. So we're wired that way. Our brain goes, I know what this is. X happens. You've decided that Y is going to be the outcome, and therefore Z response is the one. And when it comes to managing your own well-being, this at the most fundamental level, it's understanding that is a thing, that life events occur. You have navigated your way to this point in your life doing whatever it is you do, and it's brought you to this place. And of course, the more senior you are, the more inclined you are to think, therefore, it's all wonderful because it hasn't failed me yet or hasn't done me any harm, so that is something that we kind of tell ourselves that therefore I can just carry on doing the same thing and I will get, a better outcome, or the same outcome. So understanding that we are habit driven and that we have very little control over what's happening to our external environment at all. In fact, even the people that are controlling the company have very little influence on that. It's just we're all in the system, but we do have total control over how we respond. It's just that we don't often exercise it because we're so busy. We have default mode. And default mode is a requirement because even before it got as the world got as mad as it is now, if you thought about everything, you wouldn't be able to get out of the house. There's just too many choices. So, that habit of stimulus response thing is really important. So when it comes to managing your own well-being, only you can control that. Your HR team can't do that. Your boss can't do that. He or she is responsible for the pond you're swimming in. But how you choose to respond to what's coming at you is your own choice. Now, we run quite a lot of workshops. Some people don't like to hear this. They like to say, no, it's not that at all. It's my boss. He's making me do this. But the reality is that we do have a choice. It's just that all those other things that are going on mean that we find it difficult to exercise them. And in fact, we tell ourselves we can't. So that is totally a personal employee responsibility. There's nothing that your HR team can do except to create the environment where you've just said it yourself. It's okay to watch your son play football, so that's the bit that the HR and the leadership teams can function on. But whether you choose to go and see your son play football, that is down to you. So that's a critical part of any employee wellbeing program, is helping people to understand that it's not about weakness. It's just about being human. This is what we do. And the more engaged, as we said at the beginning, the more engaged you are, the more inclined you might be to just keep on over delivering. And that's something you need to take responsibility for, because you own your sustainability. Yeah. Working lives are long now. They always were, but they're even longer now. So you need to manage your energy. So a lot of work what we know people find easy to engage with and resonates with them is this whole concept of managing personal energy, understanding that what makes Nick is in several dimensions. There's a physical aspect to you, there's an emotional, there's a mental, and there's a spiritual, purposeful one. What's important to you and what path are you on, and helping people to understand how these energy dimensions get depleted during the day, but then how they can renew them in an active way gives people control. And that's the thing that most of us, if we're honest, feel we don't. When you feel overwhelmed, you just don't really have any control over anything. But actually we do have more control than we think, and we can certainly control how we use and recover personal energy. And that's been very rewarding work, because you see light bulbs going off. Okay, I can do that. I don't have to change my boss, they just change me.
I'm a total convert to the energy idea. I mean, I don't believe that people don't have time for things, they don't have energy for things. And I think we often get, from in my perspective, and people may feel different, I think that's where often things get confused. We say we haven't got time. It's our energy is so low at that moment, so much going on. We haven't got the energy to commit. And whether that's work related or exercise related or whatever, it's that energy level. If we can know what things top that energy up, then we're much more likely to redo them. It was interesting right at the start of your response to the question. You said HR professionals want to deliver and create a coaching culture, but then it becomes directive because they haven't got the time, or they feel like they haven't got the time. Well, that's where it's really important that we create the energy and the space for them to deliver what they see in their vision. Because one of the most exciting things, and I'm not an HR director, right? I do an HR podcast, and I work in the world of HR, and I speak to HR leaders every day in the world of recruitment. But they have a unique position to be the cultural architects in their business. But if they're not embodying the behaviors we've discussed because they're too busy, then actually it's really hard to make the change stick. It's all well and good saying, I'm okay with you taking your son, but then if they every day that person they're reporting into sees their own HR director never taking time for their own, very difficult, because then that's where the judgment, fear of judgment comes in. You talked about earlier, that fear that we start to embody. So I think for me, everything you've said there absolutely hits the nail. It resonates completely. So with that in mind, hoping it's resonating for others that are listening, how does that HR leader, how does that manager, what do they do with their own behaviors to help influence wellbeing outcomes? What responsibilities should they have? What can we start to do to help model the behaviors we want to see to create a psychologically safe environment where people can really perform?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a very complicated answer. It's just do it themselves, unfortunately, as you just said. But that's hard because we are all operating in the environment that is just kind of making it much easier to keep doing the same thing. So, HR professionals need to do exactly what we've just described. They need to model the behaviours themselves if they can. And in fact, when you're trying to embed the culture, you might have to make very specific and public opportunities to do that so that it's understood, because otherwise it's just words. We see this all the time, sort of, huge proliferation of wellbeing services. My own daughter works in a very pressurized environment, and they've got everything, but nobody would dare to go and use the gym at lunchtime and it's such a cliche, but you can't believe it's still happening, but it is. I might, no one else is doing it. And so it's hard to feel brave enough to be the person that does that. So you kind of need the leaders in that department to be absent at perhaps 2:30 in the afternoon. Where's Fred? He's in the gym. Oh, right. It doesn't take, you don't have to do it very many times before you've given permission for other people to do that. So, I was surprised even, 5 years on, word for word. She said, why can't you go at lunch? I said, I couldn't possibly go at lunchtime. Usually she's trying to, find how to schedule formal physical activity into her day. I said, well, you've got these fantastic gym facilities actually in your building. Can't you go there? Don't go at lunch. Can you not go at 2:00? Or 2:30, or I can't do that. This is somebody who's grown up in an environment where you talk about this stuff every day. So that's how powerful it is. But if her boss was to go, then I think it would be, okay. So it's not a very complicated answer, but I do think I think it is the answer. You just have
we've got HR directors listening to this going, I'm bought in. I need to start going to the gym, but I haven't got the energy. I haven't got the time to do it. I'm still struggling. I'm still in this fog of, I want to do everything that you've said, Lesley. It's resonating with me, but I've got so many different priorities to manage right now. Now, I would argue, and this is coming from me as a recruiter, we use recruitment agencies when we need to recruit. Even though we've got all the facilities and tools internally to do it for others, when we need to recruit, I know that we are at our bandwidth and that's not our expertise and we need to find consultants. I'll go to an expert for that. I'm a big believer that best coaches have their own coaches because you can't coach yourself, right? And whether that's in sport or life or business. So in this art, let's talk a little bit about working well, because if you are an HR director who maybe you have all the answers, but you can't find the time, you can't find the energy to do it, I would argue that solution then would be to outsource or ask for some support in enabling you to get to where you need to get to, because we all know, and the statistics are there for people to find themselves. If we know that people are happy, they're psychologically safe and well-being is high, performance absolutely follows. You're going to get the best out of the people that work for you. So maybe WorkingWell or other suppliers out there as well would be a business that works with them. But tell us a little bit about what WorkingWell could do for an HR director that is absolutely bought into this concept, but doesn't feel like they've got the bandwidth or the energy to deliver.
All right. Okay. Well, I mean, on the individual level, obviously, executive coaching in a personal energy space is really valuable, and we do a fair amount of that. So there's something about the leader themselves, and then there's supporting the leader in changing the culture in their organization, which is obviously going to involve the involvement of their team, because they don't have any control over their team. Like we said, their team make their own choices. So you can you can take responsibility for the pond, but ultimately the fish in the pond have to make their own directions in terms of how they're swimming. So there's two parts to it. As far as the individual is concerned, it's back to what we said. It's helping people, and we do have a lot of success with this. And like I say, the light bulbs go off for people, is that you can break yourself down into separate dimensions. So you can get a level of granularity around how to increase your level of personal energy. And that, again, is the light bulb, and I can remember going through this myself, like 15 years ago when it was just, business and 3 kids and the whole thing. It's like, if it were that simple, you would already be doing it. There is no one big thing. Because if there were a big thing, you'd be doing it. And it's not as simple as, well, you just need to leave work earlier, and because that's not going to work for people. But what definitely has helped people is to see that you have dimensions. So there are if you did 1 or 2 small things only, but did them in the right places, then you can make a lot of progress. And one of the things that we find quite valuable or organizations find valuable is kind of do energy audits. Very light touch, fun to do. You can tend to position this however, with whatever else other programs you've got going on. It doesn't have to be like the new thing, but trying to get a metric around, where are people's energy levels now in these different dimensions. So physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, where are they? And in each of those dimensions, if their physical energy is low, is that because they're, not thinking about the nutritional quality of what they eat? Is it because they're not doing any exercise? Is it because they're not sleeping? Is it, getting to that level of specificity, but doing it in a fun way, 10 minutes max. and delivering back to people a personal profile that says, you, Nick, are sleeping really well, but you know what, you're eating Mars bars and snacking, and that's not great for your sustainability during the day, because obviously disruption to your blood sugar level, great, sugar high, and then because you haven't got time to eat properly, and you rushed out the house in the morning, so you didn't eat anything before you left, and you grabbed a muffin at the station, or you just slid straight into your pajamas, straight in front of your camera, put your top on, but thought I'll have breakfast later. And before you know it, it's 11 o'clock and your body's screaming for sugar. So you tend to eat the wrong thing. For half an hour, you feel great. Half an hour after that, you feel terrible. If that happens to be the time when you get an email from your boss saying, where is that report, or whatever it is that has been low grade bothering you, I think, so our physical state affects our emotional state. Our emotional state then goes on, obviously, to affect our cognitive mental state, because it's very difficult to focus on something positively when you're angry. And you've got hangry because perhaps you were, so there's a lot of, there's a lot of information you can give people about very specific things that they can do for themselves that will help them have more energy, in physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, whatever. But also there's the recovery message comes in there, because it's not, if you do 10 in 90 all day long, you arrive at the end of the day pretty much like you'd started, which means you can go home. And you might not get home any earlier, but you will be in a better shape when you get home. So you're more likely to have a fulfilling evening, instead of those evenings that sometimes don't go the way you want them to go, because you go through the front door and you're exhausted. So, there are very specific things. And at the leadership level, the senior leadership level, that sort of coaching conversation based around their own metric is very, very valuable, because they'll tend to say, this doesn't apply to me, any of it. And then you can say, okay, but apparently it does. And then they can set very small and very specific objectives and see a change quite quickly, which then, of course, will tend to make more conversations more likely and even more productive. If you do that at a team or even an organizational level, getting that type of metric together, you then, of course, get a map for what's energy like in your team collectively. Individuals get their personal feedback. But it's really valuable. We know it's really valuable for teams and managers to have a sense of what's the energy profile, the team energy profile for my team. Yeah. And there's a series of interventions then that you can, just having a conversation about that, actually. It's one of the lovely things about this type of work, is that sometimes the investigation becomes part of the intervention, because just getting people in a room and talking about this, we've all contributed to it, makes it safe. You're creating a safe type of conversation to say, well, actually, I'm really struggling to get, I am struggling with this. And you find loads of other people are struggling with it as well on your team. And suddenly we're back to feeling like we belong again. So there's a lot.
Ties into the coaching culture mindset as well, doesn't it? Of asking questions to find the answers, the investigation piece that you mentioned. Yeah. And it's all well and good getting home for your kids, but if you're not present, and I know everyone who's got children, or whatever your commitment to your partner, your dog, your cat, there's a very different to being there and being present. And they're different things, and quality time over quantity of time. And we can have a whole podcast on that as well. But being present when you get home is so important. How you feel different when you're really in the room and you know that you're in the room. And the energy audit, I think, is a fantastic idea. And hopefully there's lots of people thinking, well, actually, maybe that's an activity that's worth us undertaking, because the commercial ramifications of doing so, the commercial impact is great. And I think that's because you've done a book, haven't you? You wrote a book called Dangerous Waters, and that's focused on helping leaders to understand the real commercial benefits of improving employee well-being. But within that, and we've talked about a lot of those commercial benefits already and what we can get out. And if there's more, please bring them to the fore. But I'm also interested to know, what are some of the threats that exist within those dangerous waters that perhaps people haven't considered yet?
Well, the assumption is always that employees have spare capacity. We're still, if we're honest, we've got another book coming out next year that talks about this, this conflict between personal mission and corporate mission. And because people are so we have such a complicated relationship with work now, and it is so much a part of people's psyche, that it is because they just keep finding the extra space not always the energy actually, but just they find ways of making it happen. I think employers have increasingly come to kind of think that that's limitless, that trading on the goodwill of the staff, if you like, is a strategy that we can use forever. And as we said at the beginning, there's lots of evidence to suggest that that's no longer the case. That their companies are now very lean, very efficient. Technology has made it much easier for people to work longer and longer hours. You don't have to be physically present anymore. And so if you combine the ease with which I'll just do this email, I'll just finish this report, I'll be right with you. Whereas there used to be a physical separation between home and work. I think it's becoming much harder for people to manage those boundaries that are so important for emotional and physical health. And so the Dangerous Waters, that book was called Dangerous Waters all those years ago, because there is an iceberg. What you see in terms of sickness, absence, and ill health is unattractive and unfortunate, but it's only actually a small part of it. It's the bit that you can actually see, the well-being damage, if you like, is the bit that sticks up above the waterline. The bigger piece is under the waterline in terms of people's progressive disengagement, their inability to be as creative as they once were. Because as you become overwhelmed, as we've said already, you tend to feel less confident and more fearful that you're going to make a mistake or that you've made a mistake, and so people just collaborations get less productive, and mistakes and things go up. So but mainly I think it's the big piece is the impact it has on people's lack of ability to innovate and be creative and experiment, which is even more important now. I mean, the original book's probably at least a decade old now, but nothing has changed. It's just got more so, because we need to do more and more with less and less.
You touched on some of those stats in your next book, didn't you? Which I think was Managing Workplace Stress. And there's some statistics in there that said 10% of every workforce is likely to report low levels of satisfaction at their jobs. But interestingly, you talked about that link between personal and professional. In that book, you said 20% are likely to report they've had some kind of major life event happen to them in the last 3 months. And if we're not having these conversations, if we're not aware, then we don't know how to manage that, right? If we're only looking at the bottom line numbers and we're not the holistic person behind those numbers, then we're not going to be prepared for the drop off or the changes, or we know how to manage those things effectively. And I thought some of those statistics were quite stark.
Yeah, and they're no better. If anything, they're worse. I think that you raise a good point, because it's great, and we're very supportive of organisations who want to provide what would be understood to be tertiary support to people. So when people are feeling overwhelmed, when they're struggling, it's great that they've got somewhere to go in their organisation to have a confidential conversation about how they're feeling, and perhaps with the help of a counsellor or a therapist or a coach to follow those threads back upstream to, okay, what can we change, what have we got the ability to have some influence on. But they are confidential conversations, so the organisation doesn't get to know what's going on for people. And in the book that we're writing, we're saying that your employees have so much information running around in their head with them, but because by and large we don't have enough opportunities to share that information in a psychologically safe way, you don't know about it, but we do, because we talk to them, which is why we're writing the book. A chapter actually ends, I think, which is why we know about it, because they tell us about it. But creating that opportunity inside your organization to have open conversations around how good's the work, the assumption good work is good for you. It's true, it is, but do you know how good the work is? And if so, how? Because human beings are really, really good at behaving one way and feeling different, aren't we? Right. We have to do that.
And if we don't look at ourselves in the same way, I think that I'm very, very honoured to have almost 2 decades worth of WorkingWell experience on the show today, and hopefully there's a lot of content that's resonating with people. If we pull it all together, if you imagine a bag now, we're pulling the drawstring, we're holding the 5 key things inside. What would be your 5 critical, workable solutions that people can really think about when it comes to managing stress at work?
Yeah, I think understanding where your personal resources come from as an individual is key. I mean, the organisation's got lots of responsibilities, but the employee is the only one that can control the response. So understanding your own relationship between well-being and personal performance is really important. What makes you you, and understanding how you might be able to manage energy, because you can't manage time, you can only manage your energy. And then how do you renew that in different dimensions? I think that would be number one for me. Number two, I think, would be that the manager needs to understand that they can completely confound that. So the employee can, right, got it. But then if you don't behave in a certain way that supports that, it's extraordinarily difficult for anyone who works for you to actually adopt the right well-being behavior.
They've got a model of behavior.
So you've got to do that. And I think, you know, in three, I think, did you ask for five? Certainly the third one would be that it's creating spaces in an organization for people to be able to tell it how it is. And that's not, you know, that's not it is a quick win, because you can start it tomorrow by just, you know, being the change you want to see yourself. But I think, you know, creating a culture where we regularly discuss, you know, how are we feeling from an energy perspective? How does the work feel? You know, is this work producing, growing, stretching, stand on the desk, sing the company song type feelings? Or is it making me think, I don't want to go there today? Because as a leader, you need to know that, and your employees are very happy to share it, but you do have to create the right opportunities for them to do that. It's that everyone is, as we started at the beginning, everyone is a stakeholder. So we've all got very specific roles to play. So
the last question, and before we open the vault, just brings up to mind, because, you know, we've talked a little bit about embodying behaviours, and sometimes we haven't got the time, and actually the things we teach are often things we're only teaching ourselves. Now, we've got an expert on WorkingWell on the show. You've given us some great advice. Let me throw the question back at you. So that's a bit of a challenge, Lesley. How do you manage your own stress? Because we're coming out of a pandemic where your world must have absolutely erupted in terms of, you know, we've seen so much work-life balance changes, things coming to the fore. It's at the top of company agendas. You're doing podcasts with me, you're writing a new book. So how do you manage your own stress? How do you manage your own well-being?
Showing some vulnerabilities first. I would say we don't always get it right, which is good for us, because it proves that it's one thing to say it, and you have to remember that it's very hard for people to get that, but actually execution can be complex. I think if we did one thing, and we were extraordinarily busy, is that we were never forgot that it is about maintaining boundaries, and that it's the pressure to let boundaries slip and you know, be in your office for 20 hours a day was intense. But I think we were pretty good at you know, not doing that, you know, very specific lines of like, that's it, lid down on the laptop, come back to it tomorrow, it will still be there tomorrow, and engaging with families. I think, you know, what we didn't do so well, and it's only now that that's working through the system actually, is that we were so task focused, because we kind of get all this and we know that we all get it. We didn't talk about it very much, didn't talk about our own, how were we feeling? We're just busy talking about everybody else's well-being. And so because we stopped traveling, particularly myself and my key facilitator, senior consultant, we used to sort of spend quite a lot of time traveling. So you'd catch up with what we would now call water cooler conversations, I suppose, you know, the inconsequential stuff, you know, standing around in airport lounges and stuff like that. And of course, that's the stuff that disappeared. So when you're like super, super, super busy, it does become very task orientated, even though we know this, we should know this stuff better than anyone else. And, you know, quite a few things kind of tumbled out 18 months later, sort of assumptions that people had made around, you know, why they weren't being involved in work, or, you know, did someone else get their work? Which only goes to show, even amongst the most highly informed, you know, we're all human. We all have our little insecurities, and, you know, they can grow. So, you know, we did most of it well, but not all of it.
Well, you mentioned that you guys deliver executive coaching. One of the reasons there are so many executive coaches out there is because the people at the top are often those that need the most support, right? And we don't always see it. They don't have all the answers. So I think that come full circle. But I'm conscious of our own boundaries of time. So I'm going to ask you three short, sharp questions in the HR L&D vault. First question is this, Lesley, if you could give one piece of advice to the world, what would it be?
Recover.
Amazing. Perfect. If you had the opportunity, what advice would you give a younger you just starting out in this new world of work?
I would. That's a great question. Cut yourself some slack, really. I think, again, young people come out of university or, formal education expecting to be, real world ready, and nothing can prepare you for the fact that for the first time in your life, there is no agenda.
Yeah.
From 5 to 18, you always had exams to go for, you had lessons to go for, and suddenly it's like down to you. That's quite scary. So I think cut yourself some slack.
I think that's great advice. And last but not least, what is the sort of one guiding principle or behavior that you've seen in every great leader that you've worked with?
Ability to take on other people's perspectives.
Lovely. Fantastic. Well, of course, if anyone is interested in finding out more about Lesley Cooper's books, they are available in the show notes. Just to remind you, they are Dangerous Waters, Strategies for Improving Wellbeing at Work, and Managing Workplace Stress, a Best Practice Blueprint, both available on Amazon. Links will be in the show notes. I will also include a LinkedIn profile if you want to connect with Lesley to find out more. And of course, a link to her wonderful website, which is www.workingwell.co.uk. Just leaves me one more chance to say a huge thank you to Lesley Cooper for joining me today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I've got loads from this. I hope everyone else has as well. Just a chance to reflect, recover, trust and inspire. And of course, if you're an HR L&D leader listening to this show and need support with a recruitment vacancy, please do get in touch with either myself or any of my wonderful team at JGA Recruitment. You can reach us at www.jgarecruitment.com. Just need to say one more huge thank you to Lesley Cooper from WorkingWell for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast.
Thanks, Nick. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day. Now
Thanks,
recover.
Lesley, you too. There we go. We're all good. We'll just